Welcome back to another reading and correcting with the joys of doing this live. Welcome back to another reading and correcting with me, Kindar, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, they're every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. And if you're looking to support me, that is on my Patreon. Today we are doing Chapter 3 of Breaking Step. Most of the occupied tables at townsfolk. Most of the occupied table had townsfolks sitting at them, with runners at a few. Like Tibs and his team, they were experienced. The urchins didn't come to the inn. They stayed with the families that housed them. Tibs didn't know what the guild would let them do once they had their elements and formed teams. Krosef brought food and drinks, paused long enough to exchange a concerned look with Jackal, then moved on to serving other tables. Jackal ate heartily, while Don barely touched his food. Tibbs ate without concern for the tension at the table. All right, Jekyll said, leaning back in his chair, his plate empty. Whenever you want to start, Don. He drained his tankard and motioned for another. Don moved vegetables around before pushing the plate. What is it with me and flipping not writing this properly? Don moved vegetables around before pushing the plate away. Like I told Tibbs, I was going to be a scholar. My family weren't nobles, but we had wealth enough to mingle with them and not be overtly ostracized. It was a good life, I lacked for nothing, and the inconveniences I had to deal with were minor in comparisons. Unlike many in my family's position, I didn't have aspirations of being a noble. Jekyll snorted, and Mez glared at him. I was going to be a scholar, Don repeated softly. My dues to the academy were already paid. All I needed was to be of age. I demonstrated my aptitude, and a few of the lower masters that expressed interest in taking me on as their apprentice. My future was set. My dreams were about to come true. He fell silent and looked at his plate. This should be there. What went wrong? Kamdar asked. We were merchants. Our trade was mostly textiles, and we had contracts all the way to the neighboring kingdoms. As I said, we had wealth. That's where it came from. My father had started expanding by investing in clothiers and tailors. The quality he enforced was such that nobles shopped at those businesses. He sighed. What we didn't know was that in doing so, my father had encroached onto a noble's business. He had quiet investment in several of the larger tailor shops. My father didn't deal with any of them, but our new customers used to be theirs. Don sipped his ale. Nobles are not keen on honest competition against a lower statured family. Instead of competing with my father on quality and lower statured. You know what? I'm leaving it like that. You may not like it, but I think, one, this is dialogue. Don is talking. I think it sounds better. Instead of competing with my father on quality or prices, that noble destroyed him. My father was accused of paying to have other textile merchants, other merchants' shipment destroyed or tampered with. Evidence was brought forth supporting those false claims. My father can't. You know what? I'm not going to say that because of what happens later. Evidence was brought forth supporting those claims. My father's counter-evidence was ignored by the magistrate. His expression darkened, and he took a few breaths to calm himself. My father's business were taken from him as punishment for his crime. Our family's wealth vanished with them. My father wouldn't accept it. He was determined to get the magistrate to see he was innocent. He used up the little money we had left, and we were forced to leave the neighborhood I'd spent my life in. Again, he fell silent, but started again before he needed to be prodded. It was hard. The house was so small, we could barely afford anything we had taken for... The house was so small. That's a period. We could... Come back here. We could barely afford anything we'd we had taken for granted, and my father did nothing to help us. He was obsessed, and it destroyed him. The drinking destroyed him. But my mother held on to enough. No one had to take up menial work, and in only a few months of moving to that neighborhood, I wouldn't be a burden on her anymore. I would be of age to start my apprenticeship, and I would become the academy's responsibility. It did not happen, Kamdar stated in the stretching silence. Don shook his head. The academy has standards, and I no longer met them. Only the best of the best is allowed into those hallowed halls, he said bitterly. Only those with the right social status is what they mean, not the abilities. We had paid, he spat. Masters had looked at me, at the work I had done to demonstrate I met the requirements. They had judged me good enough. Some already considered taking me on. But now, how could they even consider letting someone like me in, letting the rabble in? They called my work subpar. He slammed the tankard on the table. Of course, they never returned what my family had paid. They could have used the money. He picked up as Kamdar opened his mouth. I was angry, he growled. My family had been good and decent folks, and our betters had ground us down. Well, if that was how things were done, I was going to outdo them at it. Any who threatened me and my family, I ground into the dirt the way that we had suffered. He smiled. Some minor nobles even found themselves under my boots when they thought to prove themselves better than me. I took what I wanted, what I needed. I took the books I wanted to read, the power I needed to keep my family safe, the respect I deserved. He drained his tankard until I was arrested for possession of academy material and sent to a cell. The fine was exorbitantly high, the price for desecrating those oh so precious stones. They demanded gold my family could never hope to even see anymore. The long stay in my cell did not improve my attitude, he stated. Then came my chance to be a worthwhile member of society again, when the guild bought me and those in the cells and sent us here, as if, he spat, I'd been nothing more than. He trailed off, looking away. Me, Tibbs stated. A thief, Don corrected. It isn't an excuse, but I was destined to be a scholar, and because of some noble's machination, I was nothing more than a thief to any who saw me. Well, it wasn't because I was in some strange place. I was going to let anyone here treat me the way I had been back home. I would be respected, no matter how many heads I needed to ground under my boots, and woe to anyone who thought they might be better than I, for I would prove them wrong, no matter the cost. He lowered his gaze. I'm sorry, Tibs. Did your father commit those crimes? Jekyll asked casually. Jekyll! Mez snapped. No, Mez. Don cut him off. It's a valid question. The truth is, I don't know. If you'd asked me back then, I would have told you without hesitation that my father would never do such a vile thing. But I've seen too much of the world now, felt justified in doing so many vile things myself. I don't know anymore. I want to believe my father is innocent. I asked him the last time they allowed us to leave, but he was too lost in the drinks to even answer me. He sighed. And it doesn't matter anymore. I let what happened then turn me into a man that no one could stand, not even those who claimed to be my friend. Of everyone who I surrounded myself with, I can count on one hand those who didn't look at me with hate when they thought I couldn't see. I don't want to be that man anymore. You think telling us that makes what you did go away? Jekyll asked. No, I can't ask you to forgive or forget how I treated you. I'm only providing context leading up to our encounters. Mez, I needed to belittle you because I made you the representation of anyone who caused me pain. I couldn't see past your need to hold yourself and others to a better code than what's considered normal. All I saw was pretense, demanding we look up to you. You, Jekyll, terrified me. It wasn't that you'd beaten the man I didn't care about them. It was that with less than a day of knowing Mez, you stepped between me and who I wanted back. Someone I claimed as mine. No one had dared doing that since I'd gotten my element. Jekyll smirked. You might remember I was kind of full of myself back then. It didn't matter. You had decided someone I thought dirt deserved to be protected from me. So I hurt you as much as I could, taught you your place. Never was good at learning that lesson, Jekyll replied. That made you scarier because I believed you'd get back at me. It was the only thing you could do after what I did to you. I made you and Tibs monsters looking to destroy my life, and then we had to work together against your father. Would that not have let you see there were not such monsters? Commodore asked. Don snorted. That required I bothered looking. The scholar never assumes, always studies. Turns out I make a lousy scholar. You were angry, Jekyll said. That's going to mess with your thinking. But why corruption? Why not go for something like metal, like fire or metal? Something that tells everyone how dangerous you are? Our instructor told us to think carefully about what element was best suited to us. If we didn't pick the one that aligns with us, our progression would be much harder than it needed to be. That's if we survive the audience. Don looked at them. Weren't you told the same thing? After I made that crystal glow, Miss said, they took me to another archer who told me I could pick an element from the list she gave me. I picked fire out of those 8 because I looked more useful than any of the other. I picked fire out of those 8 because it looked more useful than the others, especially since some of them I didn't get. How is mind an element? Don looked at Tibs. He shrugged. Tirenia told me to pick one of the 4 core elements. When I asked about the rest, she said they weren't as good. He considered how much to add. I wanted people around me to stop dying, and water was more suited to that, but I didn't understand much of what having that element meant. They told me to pick earth, Jekyll said, since I'd already shown my skull was as thick as it. The sorcerer looked at Commodore. I did not go through the same as you. Darkness called to me, and I answered. Jekyll snorted. Our cleric loves wrapping himself in mystery. I don't think he's answered that question the same way twice. Right, Don said disdainfully. He snapped his mouth shut. When he spoke again, his voice was controlled. Wouldn't you be interested in answering some question? I'm curious what it means to be a cleric of an element other than purity. Not particularly, Commodore replied, smirking. Don opened his mouth, then closed it, and he let out a breath. As he opened his mouth again, Jekyll pushed papers at him. Don looked at them. Looked at the diagram, then the fighter. And now, you expect me not to ask about how it is the sorcerer didn't realize you were hiding them on you. Jekyll looked around, and Mez nodded. Tibs studied Don. He didn't lie when he said he wanted to be better, but this could cause problem if they weren't careful. Not only to the team, but to every runner. If the guild found out there was one item they couldn't detect as being woven through with essence, they would scrutinize everyone who walked out of stealth. He nodded. They'd never know without putting the sorcerer to the here I could confuse if the they refers to the guild or the team. I wanted to refer to the team. Ah, ba ba pa 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 pa. He nodded. They'd never know. How could he know? The sorcerer was doubt putting him to the test. He nodded. How could he know? That's a question. He nodded. How could he know how determined the sorcerer was without putting him to the test? Commodore shrugged. The dungeon dropped the pouch a few runs back, Jekyll said. That can't be detected, and that fits a lot of stuff in it. Don narrowed his eyes. You expect me to believe that you got lucky enough? Luck's not a thing, Jekyll replied, smirking. Don took a few breaths and spoke in a calmer tone. Do you understand how rare such an item is? I've never read about something like that as part of dungeon loot. How did you read about the kind of loot dungeons have? As asked. The guild catalogs everything dungeon runners and what? A handover. The guild catalogs everything runners hand over when they leave, and that. Why would a runner hand over something like this? Jekyll asked. How else are they going to? Don trailed off. You were able to tell what it is. His expression became thoughtful. How does it work? How did you know? How would I know how something like that works? It's magic. As for how I knew, after coming across the chests that are larger inside than out, we haven't been taking anything for granted. I reached in and couldn't touch the sides. I reached further until I had it to my elbow. And we can't tell there's a weave through it, Tibs added, unless we touch it. What about enchanted things you put in it? Don asked. It vanishes from sight and senses, Jekyll stated. Can I touch it? No, without my man's permission, the fighter replied. What? Don asked, perplexed. Why would he have us saying? His pale skin turned red. That's not what I'm talking about. Jekyll burst out laughing. I know, but it was too easy. And yes, you can, but not here. He stood. How about we retire to the team's room? It's been a while since I've been there. And that concludes chapter 27 of Breaking Step. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter will be up, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read the story, it is available for free on Royal Road. If you want to read ahead of Royal Road as well as support me, my Patreon is about 20 chapter ahead of that. And if you are looking to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. Links are in the note. And with that, I shall wish you a good day.